Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 49 of Dollar Dialogue, where today's episode is regarding K-Dynasty, how South Korea went from war to wealth with Mason Kim. Today's episode is very introspective as it delves into South Korea's rise from the rubbles to the riches. And today we are accompanied by Mr. Mason Min Seop Kim, who is a student at uh, St. Johnsbury Academy, Jeju, and he's a rising sophomore. Mason is a very intelligent person when it comes to finance, economics, and politics. In fact, he won the best investment pitch award at Wharton, and we are very excited to have Mason here. So, Mason, is there anything that you would like to the introduction that I've said today?
I would like to thank Arib for the specific explanation. Yeah, and I am very looking forward to today to discuss the deepest parts regarding the Korea's past economic developments and those stuffs.
Thank you, Mr. Mason Kim. So, to begin the first segment of our podcast, we'd like to talk about the historical past of Korea, how it went from rubbles to riches. So, when the Korean War ended in 1953, South Korea lay in ruins. Two-thirds of its industrial capacity was destroyed. Its capital, Seoul, had changed hands multiple times, and millions were displaced. Per capita income hovered around $67, lower than that of many African countries at that time, and South Korea lacked natural resources, had limited arable land, and was entirely dependent on US foreign aid, receiving over $60 billion in today's dollars between 1953 and 1976. Fast forward to today, and the story feels almost mythical. South Korea is now the 10th largest economy in the world with a per capita GDP of over $35,000, home to global tech titans like Samsung and Hyundai, and one of the most digitally advanced societies on earth. The OECD even calls it one of the most remarkable growth stories of the 20th centuries. So, what happened? The transformation began under President Park Chung-hee, who took power in 1961 through a military coup. His vision was clear: industrialize or perish. And the state of South Korea adopted an aggressive development model anchored in export led growth, centralized planning, and strategic protectionism. Park launched South Korea's 5 year development plan in 1962, emphasizing heavy and chemical industries like steel, shipbuilding, and petrochemical sectors that would generate foreign exchange and build national self reliance. Crucially, though, South Korea didn't follow a free market playbook. Instead, it used state directed capitalism. The government handpicked winners, providing low interest rates, subsidies, and tax breaks to firms that showed potential export. And the Korean Development Bank and other state institutions funneled capital toward these targeted industries, ensuring that capital accumulation served national goals rather than short term profits. And the results were staggering. Between 1960 and 1990, exports grew from $32 million to over $65 billion. GDP per capita grew at an average rate of 7.2% annually. Life expectancy jumped from 53 years to 71, and literacy rose from 78% to near universal. And by the 1980s, South Korea had emerged as the newly industrialized economy, often grouped alongside Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong as one of the four Asian tigers. But what truly differentiated Korea was its relentless investment in human capital. The government poured resources into public education, almost ensuring universal primary education by 1970, and expanding technology and tertiary institutions. Therefore, by 1995, almost 90% of South Korean high school graduates enrolled in higher education, making Korea one of the most educated nations in the world. Still, this early miracle was not without its cost. Labor unions were suppressed, political oppositions were crushed, and environmental regulations was very weak. But as we'll explore in the next segment, these fundamental choices, while controversial, laid the groundwork for one of the fastest economic transformations in recorded human history. So, with that being said, is there anything that you'd like to the historical introduction that I've said, Mr. Supreeth Nagella, Mr. Min Seop Mason Kim, or Mr. Shazib Karim? I see Mr. Shazib Karim, your hand is raised.
Yeah, Arib Malik. So Arib, I completely agree with you, and um, you gave a really good introduction to the background of Korea's past and the history. So, Arib, as you had mentioned earlier, I just like to add on and say that for centuries, Korea was known as the Hermit Kingdom, a fiercely independent and culturally rich nation, and as you had mentioned, it was located before the two hegemonic powers, or like two giants, China and Japan, and it was ruled by the Joseon dynasty for over 500 years. But things began to change rapidly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries because as Japan modernized and militarized, it began to take asset control over Korea. And in 1910, Korea was officially annexed by Japan, beginning the 35 years of brutal colonial rule. And during this period, Koreans faced forced labor, cultural suppression, and widespread exploitation. And Japanese sought to erase Korean identity, banning the Korean language in school and replacing Korean names with Japanese ones. But but the Korean War. Then the Korean War came, which lasted 3 years, from 1950 to 1953, and it was absolutely devastating. And because from I was also reading a book on this, and I remember like the number was that I think an estimated amount of 2 million people had died, and many of them were civilians. And cities were bombed into rubble, infrastructure were destroyed, and families were torn apart. But mm, uh, but yeah, as I was saying, um, by the time it was signed in 1953, South Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world, and its economy was in ruins. Over half of the population was unemployed, literacy rates were low, and natural resources were scarce, and it relied heavily on American aid just to survive. So, so they were in a very sticky situation, a very tough situation, as I had mentioned, and as also had how Arib had described. So, with this being said, I think Supreet, your hand is raised. What would you like to add?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Shazay, for such an interesting addition. But there's a part to the story that people almost never talk about, but it's super important. During South Korea's early industrial boom in the 1960s and 70s, there was this unexpected factor that helped kickstart the economy, and this was the Vietnam War. See, because while the US was fighting in Vietnam, they asked South Korea to send troops to help, and South Korea agreed. They sent over 300,000 soldiers, making it the largest foreign force in Vietnam after the US itself. But this wasn't just about military support. It came with huge financial benefits. The US paid South Korea billions of dollars in military contracts and wages. And what's wild is that the South Korean government wasn't as corrupt as what you would expect in developing countries today, because they didn't just pocket that money, they funneled it straight back into the economy. They used the money to build highways, start factories, and fund early versions of companies like Samsung and Hyundai. So, in a weird twist of history, you could actually say that part of South Korea's economic miracle was funded by the Vietnam War. It wasn't just about exports or hard work, it was also about smart political moves and knowing how to capitalize on global events. Yes, Shazib, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, Supreet, I completely agree with you, and I do agree that the Vietnam War had a large impact on South Korea as a whole, and also like how I had mentioned before about like how Japan's rule had a huge impact on Korea's history and how it is now. So, based on that, I'd like to ask like Mason or Ari or Supreet a question. Maybe Mason, you can answer this. So, Mason, what do you think? Like, how did Japanese rule impact Korea's economy, culture, and identity?
Oh, Shazad, the audio is not clear. Can you repeat the question real quick?
Oh, sorry. How do you think like Japanese rule impacted Korea's economy, culture, and identity?
Okay, so basically, we all share the feeling and some sort of revenge to Japan. Like some old generation feels that, like saying that Japan has like colonized us and they have genocided some of our like I don't know, like innocent people. But by during that time when we did those sort of economic development, we generally like perceived Japan as the main competitor. So basically, what we thought about was we should be better than elites, those who have killed my ancestor, and those. So those feelings kind of what should I say like motivated more harshly those people, the workers of people, the laborers of people in the beginning, so that we were able to all the people were passionate about the economic development, and especially it kind of helped with not having any some sort of critics regarding the government's like centralized economic like development efforts, because the people was trying to anyways win Japan, because they, as I mentioned, have a very like hurtful like memory or something, and also they thought they should be way better than North Korea because they are also our enemy. Because I think you guys will all know, but like Korea and North Korea's economic situation right after the war was quite similar. And at some point before Park Chung-hee was elected, North Korea was winning the overall economic situation, because all this infrastructure that Japan has left was built in North Korea's region. So South Korea had nothing at that moment. So we all like the economic like culture and those competitiveness mainly originated from the fact that like some sort of sense of revenge and some sort of the feeling that we must win, we must like defeat them, completely defeat them, at least in economy, so that they do not ignore us and invade us. And I think that tradition has like some sort of strengthened the Korea's foundation of economy very strong. It's very like robust right now. So
Oh, I see. That was pretty interesting. Yeah, I'd agree.
okay, yeah. So yeah, it's basically it's like based on the feeling of revenge. I would say that. Do any of you have more questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree. His regime aggressively suppress force and just follow the Japanese culture. So yeah, I can like see how you guys would feel the feeling of revenge.
Yeah, so basically, I do not have any bad feelings towards Japan right now because at the moment they are like following democracy and they're not same as these past 70 years where the military department was acting crazy and like insane. But still, at that moment, I think I kind of understand how people was so like depressed because I personally perceive China more as threat than Japan at this moment. But still, at that moment, China was also the victim of Japan's military like expansion and those stuff. So I think we had some sort of same feeling that we should anyways have a strong economy to not get invaded. I think China and Korea had a same I don't like opinion. And by now, we are competing against each other in like multiple sectors, like semiconductor and those like electronics and those stuffs. So yeah, I would. Yeah, if I was the part of the 1950s Korean society, I would still be mad at Japan. Yeah, we because our like people were genocided.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, if you were back in that society in the past, then you'd have the feeling. But like in this moment of time, it's like it's different, right? Because like in a lot of factors, they like Korea and Japan also collaborate with one another.
True, yeah. So, like, based on that feeling, I think all like that also unified all of our people to the one goal, which is the like high economic development. So basically, like as I think Supreeth mentioned the Vietnam War. Yeah, actually, no one knows that deep about Korea's like developing history, but thank you for mentioning it. So Vietnam War, it's basically the sacrifice of Korea as just normal laborers, I believe. So they were all like some sort of uh I don't know, like construction site workers and like those selling like merchants and those stuffs. But since the government asked them to please join the Vietnam War, this is the only way that we can get dollars from the United States, and this is the only way that the government can secure some sort of money which can be used to promote like more economic policies and those stuffs. So basically those laborers trusted the government and went to the war side again after the Korean War. It was the sacrifice of those innocent lives again. And by their sacrifice, the government was able to get aided some sort of US dollars and those stuff from the United States. And since the government was not corrupt, as mentioned, and it was very clean and it was very strict, and it was also thanking those soldiers and those innocent lives, those money were able to be allocated to the industry itself, and it gave the foundation for Korea's manufacturing industry. We started with like creating those fake hairs and like those stuffs, but now we are the top leader in the semiconductor and those stuffs right now, because the foundation itself was very like robust. It was not kind of some sort of shaped by other corrupt classes or whatever, and it was just clean. And the government was, yeah, very strict. They were not corrupt at all. So it was, yeah, we were able to have a robust foundation. Do you guys
Thank you
know?
everyone for
Yeah.
the discussions, Mason Kim, Shazib Karim, and Supreeth Nagella. And I'll completely agree with you guys regarding South Korea's development and how crucially the Vietnam War played a role. And to move on to the second segment of our podcast, I would like to talk about the chaebol gamble, Samsung, Hyundai, and the cost of concentration. So, if the Korean state laid the foundation for growth, then the chaebols in South Korea build the skyscrapers for it. And the term chaebol refers to the massive family-owned conglomerates that dominate South Korea's economy, like Samsung, Hyundai, LG, SK. And these aren't just companies; they're empires with dozens of subsidiaries spanning everything from electronics and construction to insurance and even amusement parks. But the origin of the chaebols is deeply intertwined with the state policy because in the 1960s and 70s, Park Chung-hee administration handpicked a small group of firms and gave them everything: cheap credit, tax exemptions, government contracts, and protected domestic markets. In return for one thing, export performance. If the company could meet its export target, it received more support. If not, it was cut off. And this tight state business symbiosis created an elite circle of corporate giants. For example, Samsung started trading and textiles, but with state loans, it entered electronics in the 1970s. Today, Samsung Electronics alone generates over 15% of South Korea's GDP. Hyundai moved from construction to cars to shipbuilding, becoming a national champion and a global player by the 1980s. And LG became a pioneer in petrochemicals, electronics, and telecom, heavily supported by the state in return for innovation and scale. And at first, this strategy worked wonders. It allowed Korea to achieve economies of scale, compete globally, and develop cutting-edge industries in record time. But the export targets created accountability, state backing, de-risked massive investment. So between 1970 and 1990, Korea's industrial output multiplied 12-fold. But the chaebol model came with serious side effects. First, it crowded out small and medium enterprises. Because chaebols dominated access to finance, land, and government contracts, smaller firms were often left behind, unable to scale, innovate, or compete on a level playing field. Today, over 80% of R&D spending in Korea comes from just a handful of conglomerates. Second, it created a culture of corporate nepotism and opacity. Most tables are still run by founding families, often through intricate cross shareholding arrangement that give them control without owning majority of the shares. This led to the scandals like the Samsung bribery case in 2017 and the widespread public resentment. Koreans even have a term for it, the gapjil, which is the abuse of power by superiors, often linked to chaebol elites. Third, Korea's economy became dangerously concentrated. In 2024, the top 10 chaebols account for over 80% of the Korean stock market capitalization and nearly 60% of GDP. That means that when a chaebol sneezes or when a chaebol gets destroyed, the entire economy will catch a cold. And finally, this system fueled inequality. While the elite families grew fabulously wealthy, wages for young workers stagnated and job security outside the chaebols deteriorated, setting the stage for today's youth frustration and mental health crisis. So, in many ways, the chaebol gamble paid off. It turned South Korea into a tech and industrial powerhouse, but it also created structural imbalances, market distortion, and deep societal division that Korea is still grappling with. So, with that being said, is there anything else that you would like to say, Mr. Shukri Nagala, Mr. Min Seop Mason Kim, or Mr. Shazib Kareem?
Yeah, Arib, I would like to
Yeah.
say that I completely agree with you, and thank you for that was a beautiful explanation, Arib, and I completely agree with you. So thank you for that. But adding on, Arib, like as you had mentioned, it was a risk, right? It was a massive risk, and the government was basically betting the country's future on a handful of families and companies. And in some ways, this concentrated power did create problems such as corruption, monopolies, corporate debt, and crony capitalism, like you had mentioned, Arib. But here's the thing: the gamble worked, right? Samsung started out selling noodles and dried fish. Now it's the world's largest smartphone and memory chip maker. Hyundai went from fixing cars to building some of the most advanced vehicles and ships on Earth. A- And by the 1980s and 90s, South Korea had become an industrial and technological powerhouse, and the chaebols were the center of it. So yes, the chaebol model did come with risks, and even today it's controversial. But without it, there might not have been a South Korean economic miracle at all. And yeah, so I see Supreeth has his hand raised. So Supreeth, what would you like to add?
That was such an amazing addition, Shazib. But I would also like to add that something that often flies under the radar when we talk about Korea's economic miracle is the massive role that these chaebols played in shaping the country's education system and talent pipeline during their rapid industrialization. Because this wasn't just about hiring workers. The chaebols knew from early on that to compete globally, they would need highly skilled engineers, technicians, and managers who could innovate and run complex operations. So instead of waiting for the governmental education system to organically produce these talents, the chaebols took a much more hands-on approach. In the 1970s and 80s, giants like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG didn't just rely on government schools, they actively partnered with universities and technical institutes across South Korea. They funded research centers focused on industrial technology, set up scholarship programs to attract the best students, and even worked with universities to design specialized curricula tailored to their specific needs. For instance, Samsung invested heavily in engineering departments at major universities, helping create programs that taught the exact skills their R&D teams needed. Hyundai helped set up vocational schools that trained workers in automotive manufacturing and advanced machinery. This kind of cooperation meant that graduates were essentially pre trained for the industries driving Korea's exports. So, this was more than just corporate philanthropy or community support. It was a strategic long term investment to build a reliable pipeline of talent that could maintain and accelerate Korea's technological and industrial edge. And the impact of this strategy went far beyond economics because it helped establish a culture where education was deeply tied to national development goals and where chaebols became influential not just in business but also in shaping social values and cultural norms around education, hard work, and innovation. So, when you think about why South Korea's education system is often praised for producing world class engineers and innovators, remember that these chaebols played a huge role in sculpting the system from the ground up, ensuring that their growth wasn't just about money, but about building human capital that could keep pushing the country forward in a nationalistic manner.
It's brief. Thank you for sharing those details. So, as Steve, from the perspective of Korean, yeah, I think that's a very valid statement. So, basically, without the J balls, we would not have the this much like advanced economy at all. Because like Samsung, Hyundai, LG, they all have like respective those like best like areas of business. So, for example, Samsung is best at the semiconductory and those electronics business, and Hyundai is leading the ship making industry and also the cars, and LG, same as similar as Samsung, is also leading in like the electronics, but especially limited to those televisions and those stuffs. So yeah, without the J Bowls and with this effective like division of the areas of business, our country will not be like different as those like nations who had just recovered from the colonization during the 1950s. So like yeah, they all started with simple business, as you mentioned, like selling fishes, selling foods and those stuffs. But now by gathered by the strong sense that we gotta revive our like nation, and we all have got a responsibility to like revive our economy and lead it towards the best level it can reach. Jables have like done a great role, but still, as Arib brought in the like introduction, J-Balls have not only brought the pros, it also brought cons. So basically, they brought division and difference within the income levels. That is true. And they're also counting about 80% of Korea's GDP. This is highly reliant, and if any of the J-Balls, like as I mentioned, dies, then the economy is it is true that economy is falling. So the government right now is even trying to eliminate the factors that may affect the J-balls, but regardless of that, it is obvious that the Korea's economic structure is very in some sort of volatile like condition. But however, still, I would like to mention that like J-Ball's contribution to education, J-Ball's contribution to the advancement of Korea's economy, and all those contributions recognized by the people. Yeah, J-Ball with having J-Ball than not having Jable because of the social division and those stuffs would be better. Yeah, I would still agree with the idea of Jable because by doing that, that also naturally like competed to like other Jables to other Jables. So basically, like for example, Samsung and Hyundai, they will always had a rivalry relationship. And if Hyundai's founder expanded their area of business into semiconductor, I'm sure Korea's like economy would have advanced more because like competition in the capitalism economy is always anyways like concludingly promoting those sort of like positive results because of the advancement of products and those stuff. So anyways, yeah, I would still stand with Chibo's idea regardless of its like social like problems that it brought still because it has more advantages.
Thank you, Mr. Mason Kim, Mr. Supreeth Nagella, and Mr. Shazib Kareem for the insightful responses. So, with that being said, I would like to ask Mason. So, as a South Korean, how do you think the chaebols impacts the average Korean life? Is it for the better or is it for the worse?
Okay, thank you, Arib, for the question. So I would say it is better for all because everyone, like in the 1970s, 1980s, everyone was almost related to J-Ball. So basically, what I mean is that the J-Balls hired all those people, no, but the J-Balls like created some sort of supply chain within this domestic industry. So for example, like let's say Hyundai, like they need to create shipments. Then and by not just simply creating the site to manufacture ship, it also created those like companies which like help them receive those necessary materials while building constructing ships and those stuff. So it created all little businesses and connected each other into one supply chain. So gradually it helped everyone to benefit from Hyundai just making ships. So it didn't only simply benefited the Hyundai itself, but benefited others who have even just very little relationship with ship industry by just allowing them to sell their products and those stuff. And also J-Balls, education. Yeah. So university in Korea, the only university in Korea was like Seoul National University, but that was like the best university still because the Japanese anyways operated those during the colonization era. But by like the J balls like strong like some sort of support within the R&D stuff and like trying to advance the economy. The Park Chung-hee was also passionate for that. So gradually with the like gather like the combination of the government and J balls, that I believe the education was also be able to be sophisticated and provide a quality like information and like provide quality courses and those stuff. So I believe J balls have brought more positive impacts rather than the negative impacts within the broader society.
That was such a beautiful explanation, Mason. But I was also wondering, with having chaebols, the government had a preferential treatment towards them. So this meant that many other companies also ended up dying because they didn't have any government backing or any funding at low interest, and this meant that there are currently fewer companies that could have been there compared to before the chaebols were given this treatment. So do you personally think that it would have been better if these smaller companies were also given an equal opportunity and an equal chance to rise in this industrial revolution?
Okay, thank you for that interesting question, Supreeth. So I would like to answer it. If my nation's situation was like similar as the United States, where they have abundant resources and those stuffs, I would agree with like rather having a lot of J balls than like having a lot of small businesses and supporting them, because Korea had literally nothing but land. So they had no, we still have no resources at all. We only got like seas nearby us, and our land was all destroyed by the because of the Korean War and those stuff, and we wasn't even able to properly get foods for those people in the beginning. So the reason why ramen was invented in Korea is because of, not for the purpose of like pleasure. I mean, like those like to just simply get tasty things, but it was for the like purpose of survival, because we weren't able to have rice enough for all to feed all of our people. So we had no resources, and even if in the severe condition that we have no resources at all, if we even split those resources into like those small businesses and those stuff, I believe that this much effective economic development wasn't, yeah, able to be achieved.
Yeah,
Shaz,
so
yeah, sorry, yeah, please go ahead.
yeah, Super. Thank you for the question. It's a really interesting question, and I'd say that so let's put this into perspective. Let's imagine if the government had opened up the banking system, invested more in entrepreneurs, local tech, small manufacturers, and small companies, as you had mentioned, Supreet. So, like, would South Korea have a more diverse industries today? Would it, like, income inequality be lower? Like, these are questions that come up with with this topic, and I'd say that the answer is maybe. There's no objective answer to this, but it's also possible that without those big players leading the way, Korea wouldn't have moved as quickly on the global stage. So this like leads to a real tension with like efficiency versus equality, or speed versus sustainability. So it's really hard to come to a conclusion here, Supreet. You know what I mean?
That makes a lot of sense, both Mason and Shazib. Thank you for such insightful and understandable thoughts.
Yeah, I would also, yeah, agree with, yeah, Karim's opinion, but Mr. Karim's opinion, but yeah, but still, I would like to just recall that without TJ Bo, we weren't able to allocate our nations all those like precious resources in appropriate amounts to others. Because like for example, if we for example had like more than like 50 ship making businesses, then all of those people will be split into each of them. And by doing that, so then they wouldn't be able to like advance in such a short period, and with given the short period of time, we weren't able to achieve that much like progresses, because everyone will be like competing against each other, but it would be so complicated, and it might just bring all of them bankrupt, because the effective allocation wasn't able at all. So I would yes, it is like unfortunate that J balls like still breed some social divisions, and especially within the income levels, but still like considering the short amount of, yeah, like the given short amount of time, and also like shortage of surplus of those resources, I would say that chaebols would have kind of fit more to advance my country's like economic situation during 1950s and 60s.
Thank you everyone for the insightful responses. So moving on to the next segment of our podcast, I would like to talk about the crisis and catharsis, the 1997 IMF bailout. So by the mid 1990s, South Korea looked unstoppable. It was an OECD member, a booming powerhouse, and a foster child for rapid industrialization. But behind the glossy numbers was a fragile foundation: skyrocketing debt, murky corporate books, and an over-leveraged banking system which was deeply entangled with the chaebols. Then came 1997, the year the Asian miracle turned into the economic nightmare. It began in Thailand with the collapse of the Thai baht. Panic spread across Asia as investors dumped risky assets. South Korea, despite its size, was no exception. Within weeks, the won plummeted by over 50%. The stock market lost half of its value, and the foreign reserve fell to just $4 billion, barely enough to cover a few weeks of imports. Corporate giants like Daewoo and Kia were drowning in debt. The banks, heavily exposed to chaebol liabilities, were teetering on collapse. But by late November, Korea was on the brink of default. The country had no choice but to knock on the IMF's door. So in December 1997, South Korea accepted a $58 billion IMF bailout, the largest in IMF history at the time. But the money came with strings, lots of them, in fact. The IMF package required sweeping reforms, tight monetary policy to stabilize the won and tame inflation, as well as financial liberalization, including the removal of capital controls and opening banks to foreign investors, as well as corporate governance reforms to rein in reckless expansion by the chaebols, and lastly, the labor market flexibility, including the controversial ability to lay off workers more easily. And for many South Koreans, this was traumatic. Layoffs surged, unemployment jumped from 2.6% to 7% in just 1 year, unheard of in Korea's post war history. And the term IMF generation was coined to describe disillusioned youth who came of age during the crisis. And yet, paradoxically, this collapse became a turning point. The crisis forced South Korea to confront its deepest structural problems. And for the first time, transparency became a national priority. The Financial Supervisory Commission was established to oversee banks. Cross debt guarantees among chaebols were banned, and foreign capital, once viewed with suspicion, flooded into Korean's market. And by 1999, South Korea was growing again. It repaid its IMF loan ahead of schedule. Many reforms stuck, especially in finance and governance, giving Korea a leaner, more resilient economic system. Still, not all scars were healed, though. The social contract was weakened, job security eroded, irregular work contracts became the norms, and the resentment towards the IMF's one size fits all prescription still lingers. But there's no denying this, that the 1997 Asian financial crisis sort of remade South Korea. It transformed it from a state-led, closed, debt-fueled economy into a globally integrated, more transparent market system, and one where resilience became just as important as growth. So, with that being said, Mr. Shazipuri, Mr. Supreet Nagal, or Mr. Mason Min Seop Kim, what do you guys think about the 1997 Asian financial crisis, and how do you think South Korea persevered through it?
Okay, then I will start with Arab's the next agenda, IMF crisis. So basically, it was the most severe turning point for our economy because it demanded a lot of sacrifice. As Arab mentioned, the unemployment rate like dropped like two times. I mean, like increased by two times and three times in just a year, and most of the companies went bankrupt at that time, except like those big J-balls. But it was a so impactful like economic incident, which like nobody felt the seriousness of infinite amount of debt. Like they weren't all those people like involved in the economy and those stuff. They were not caring about the debt at all. Like they were not perceiving it as a serious issue because like they thought like they can just simply just make like print more money if like the debt like if the money is shortage. So basically like all those people who are called like economic specialists and those stuff, they weren't able to like play the role as a control tower of those situations. So like for example, like a lot of J balls have like made a huge success within their businesses and like during the 1980s especially. So like especially for those who were involved in the manufacturing, starting from those like metal, iron products to like cars and shipbuildings and those stuff. So they were all like some sort of confident with their business at that degree by the like end of 1980s. So what happened from 1990s is they basically tried to like gather as much funds as possible by even like asking the banks to invest in their like projects and those stuffs, and they were trying to diversify their field of business. But the attempt itself was good, but the problem is that they did too much in short period of time. So for example, if I'm one of the entrepreneurs who are like working in Korea in 1990s, and let's say my profession was basically like creating like car related products, they suddenly started to like build what should I say, like travel agency and those stuff which are not related with their business at all. They started to like I just started to like operate a build a travel agency and just do those sort of like service providing professions. And I also started to like like build some factory and build some like and produce some like foods and those stuff. So like all those diversification was not related with their original business. They just simply started because they had a lot of money because the bank didn't control the like leakage and exposure of their cash. Basically like they thought they will somehow like return it. And basically all those transactions held in 1990s Korea's economy was like based on reliability, not the company's like realistic economic situations and those stuff. So even for example, if I had like 5 billion one's debt, still the bank would have lended me money because I just simply asked them, "Can I get more money for my like business diversification? I will anyways pay back to you." And that's what the IMF crisis was triggered by. So it is very unfortunate that those things happen, but I also kind of perceive the IMF crisis as positive, like kind of positively, because, like by having the IMF crisis and undergoing those things, our people and our businesses were able to recognize the how like having a lot of debt is so negative to your future and everything still and those related stuff. So like they were able to recognize how they have lived like very irresponsibly, especially within like managing their finance and those stuff. So by undergoing the IMF crisis, we were able to like cut off all those bad cultures that has uh like uh I don't know, like all businesses start to have, like such as debt is okay and we can anyways pay back. Those like opinions were all cut out by the IMF, and we were able to have some sort of like I would say like financial financial freedom. Yeah, so like we basically were able to have like in lessons saying that diversification is not always a good choice, and sometimes just remaining with their professional like field of business that will be also a very good opinion, especially if you have not much like some sort of uh level of knowledge within those businesses. So like it's anyways a complex issue. So like it basically like uh gave a lot of lessons to our people, but still on the other hand, it's triggered a lot of wage and like income level difference like as an outcome. So I think yeah, it's a very complex issue.
Also had a smaller question. I've heard that in 1998, to pay off the IMF debt, that ordinary South Koreans donated their personal gold, including their wedding rings, to help pay off this debt. Is this true?
Yeah, that is true. So basically, they gathered under one opinion that we must gotta save our company, I mean, our nation's economy. So what happened was basically the government was shortage of dollars and those stuff. But we also the normal people didn't have a lot of dollars. So what they have done instead is donate the goats to the bank and like those institutions, and the bank gathered all of those and changed that into dollar, and they helped with the government like pay back the IMF debt, and that was yeah. I think that was still very like effective like campaign, because even though the impact of like have like gathering those goats and selling that, the like I mean the size was not that big, still it gathered all the people, like all the Korean people in one idea, with saying that the Korea, like we must save Korea's economy. And so it was able to unify all Korean people, and therefore create some mood such as helping those who have like who are like going on their challenging period because their business is not working good. So yeah, it was a very effective campaign to unify all those people. But yeah, and as a result, I believe it has somehow contributed to the like faster repay than compared to the what IMF has expected. So I what I understand is that Korea has paid back like 2 years and 3 years early than the deadline that IMF has initially like suggested to the Korean government.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. And now that I look at some data, I see that in just a few months, that over 3.5 million people voluntarily handed over 227 tons of gold. And that's about 2.2 billion worth at that time. So that's even more today. And that's such an amazing way to see how Korea united uh, due to the national pride, the trauma from colonialism, and a deep rooted fear of becoming dependent again. And for Koreans, this IMF bailout felt like losing sovereignty all over again. So they were all ready to give up their goal to reclaim it. And it's such a beautiful thing to see that such a big country is able to unify under one major problem and solve it together.
I completely agree with you, Supreet, Mason, and Shazib. And it's very inspiring to see that Koreans came forward to donate their gold, which is not something that which is not something I personally knew, but I certainly find very inspirational. And it just goes on to show how having a large population can really help your country. So moving on to the next segment, I would like to talk about the Korean K chips, the K pop, and K everything, which made Korea modern. So South Korea isn't just back from a crisis; it's now in cutting edge in both silicon and sound. So in the decades since 1997 bailout, Korea has undergone a transformation. It has moved from a low-end manufacturing to a high-end manufacturing country with high technology, high culture export. And today, South Korea is economically doing very well compared to many of its neighbors. South Korea is now currently the world's number one exporter of memory chips, with companies like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix dominating the global semiconductor supply chain. In fact, Samsung alone is responsible for about 44% of global DRAM production and over 30% of NAND flash memory, the stuff that powers your phone, your laptop, and your cloud storage. But it doesn't stop there. Korea is also a top five global exporter of electronic vehicle batteries, EV batteries, led by LG Energy Solution, Samsung, and SK. It also has the fastest average internet speed in the world, and it's a pioneer in 5G robotics and smart city infrastructure. So, what makes this even more impressive is that Korea's massive research and development, or the R&D spending, is nearly 5% of GDP, which is one of the highest in the world and above the OECD average. And this investment isn't just top down; it's embedded in the culture. Students study STEM obsessively. Universities collaborate closely with firms, and the state continues to subsidize innovation with surgical precision. Now the gear sort of shifts to the pop culture, because if the semiconductors build Korea's hard power, K-pop and K-dramas build its soft power. Over the past decades, South Korea has become a cultural juggernaut, exporting music, film, and fashion across continents. From BTS selling stadiums in the US and speaking at the UN, to Parasite winning the Oscar for Best Picture, to Netflix hits like Squid Game dominating global viewership. The Korean wave, or the Hallyu, is no longer just a regional trend, it's a global economic force. In fact, according to the Hyundai Research Institution, it estimates that BTS alone contributes $5 billion to Korean GDP, which is equivalent to hosting the Olympics every year. And it's not just about prestige, it's about the policy as well. The Korean government has actively promoted its cultural exports since late 1990s, seeing soft power as a strategic asset. Subsidies, training centers, and global distribution deals help transform Korean entertainment into a $1 trillion industry. Uh, but here's the kicker, though. The tech and culture now reinforce each other. K-pop relies on social media platforms like YouTube, powered by Korean-made chips, stored on Korean-made servers, and monetized through Korean-made e-commerce giants. It's an ecosystem, and it's built for the 21st century. Yet, with global prominence, there's new risk of trade tensions with China, and as well as U.S. Chips Act, which sort of impacts the semiconductor industry. So, with that being said, Mr. Mason Kim, Mr. Supreeth Nagella, or Mr. Shazib Karim, is there anything else that you would like to add to the fact regarding K-pop or even the Korean modern technology era?
Yep, thank you, Rip, sharing those examples of Korea's industry leaders and those stuff. So basically, yeah, K-pop and all those K culture things and like K chips, whatever. Like Korea has very successfully ended up within the exporting industry. Like they started with exporting goods such as like semiconductor chips and electronics and like ships, cars, those stuff. And now they're leading in like industry, like leading player within like exporting even cultures like musics and those idols and like those celebrities and those stuff like Blackpink and like BTS and those people who like basically everyone in the world knows. So I believe, yeah, Korea is like exporting within the semiconductor and those batteries. Those were kind of, yeah, like valid, like it was possible because we have all sacrificed all of our resources and allocated all nations' interests within that industry specifically because we were able to reach a conclusion saying that the only way to survive in between Japan and China, and in this complex geopolitical situation, is we just having a strong military and having a strong exportation industry, which everyone worldwide is reliant on us, so that which like some sort of produce like protects us from like those indefinite like military attacks and those stuff. So basically, like through the promotion of like semiconductor industry, like and like some sort of all those sort of like government like subsidize like those budgets, like all of those things went to semiconductor industry. And by now we have two great companies, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, which are all leaders in the both memory and non-memory semiconductors. So SK Hynix is, yeah, like exporting and selling its goods to Nvidia and like all those like US companies like Apple, Nvidia, and those stuff. So SK Hynix like high quality HBM are like recognized that by those like leading US semiconductor firms. And also Samsung Electronics is still like uh, exporting all those sort of like complementary stuff, like basic stuff to the like electronic companies worldwide. So like basically, Samsung also produces phones, so it uses this like semiconductor in its own phone, and also like other phones and like those like even Chinese makers and like Japanese makers, whatever, they all use Samsung chips as like basic because like it's very cheap and it's also functioning very well. So like it is Samsung is success in like producing manufacturing affordable like objects, I mean like those chips, and SK Hynix has succeed within like creating those high quality very sophisticated uh, semiconductors, which are playing crucial role within the expansion of AI technologies and those stuff in this modern era. So yeah, I would say Korea's economy is fully dependent on, like completely entirely dependent on semiconductor business, and without Samsung Electronics and the SK Hynix, I believe Korea's economy will collapse at this moment right now because we are among the chaebols, we're so heavily like reliant on semiconductor business.
Thank you so much, Mason, for such an insightful discussion uh, given by you and conversation given by you on this podcast. I also wanted to add about something else very important because South Korea isn't now just a tech powerhouse because it was quite literally the first country to live in a hyper connected society. Because by the late 2010s, over 95% of Koreans had smartphones, and South Korea had the fastest and most widespread 5G network rollout in the world. And this was back in 2010. And here's where it really gets interesting though, because Korea became the world's first true digital mirror society where almost every aspect of life soon started having an online layer. For instance, your job application, it's supposedly tracked, your social life, it's managed through apps, dating, it's done through online profiles, and even your looks are now in the modern day Korea compared constantly through AI powered beauty filters and virtual avatars. And this hyperconnectivity led to huge innovation in esports, digital banking, remote learning, and K pop fan communities. But it also created new social pressures like digital perfectionism, because currently Korea has the highest rate of plastic surgery per capita, partly due to social media filters and tech enhanced beauty culture. And there's also a rise in digital isolation despite being the most connected country. So I was just wondering what your thoughts on these new setbacks, you could say, or supposed problems caused by the hyperconnectivity.
Yes, Supreeth, thank you for sharing like those very detailed explanation within the 5G networks and those stuff. So basically, I think I can confident as the Korean people, like as the Korean, I can like confidently say that our like nation's internet speed is almost the fastest within the worldwide any other nations. So I think that was able to be achieved like especially like the first country who was able to uh use 5G in usual lives and like those stuff is because first of all we had like a lot of information and like those uh precious resources within related with the networking and those system. And also, since our nation is not that big, it's very small, 5G communication was able to be like effectively work because shorter the distance, the 5G network it works very well. So I believe, yeah, our like nations, like those networking businesses and like telecommunications business, those were able to be very sophisticated and be very advanced, highly advanced. And but still, like it also contributed in like expanding our like K culture industry, as you mentioned. So basically, K beauty and K culture. So these were all led by those chaebols, I would say, because those companies were actually like kind of split it from chaebols. So, like for example, like those cosmetics makers, they were all like originally like based on those chaebols, like cash and like funds and those stuff. But they anyways gradually split it because they had expanded like a lot and they have advanced a lot and developed a lot. But still, K beauty, yeah, it's a very interesting like industry, I think, because like at the 1970s and 80s, we were only able to like produce ships and like semiconductor, I mean not semiconductors, but like those cars and steels and those very basic stuff. But somehow like cosmetics has also develop. I think it was like all of the efforts from those like beginning founders of those companies, because yeah, like we didn't perceive like cosmetics important in like 1970s 80s, like we like no one, even the government didn't care about it. But still those like the beginning like founders have like put like astonishing amount of effort in trying to expand those like cosmetic stuff. And somehow at when Korea's exporting was reaching peak, like it started to like be those like music and those cosmetics started to be exported, and like also during the Korea's like exporting peak, And I think it's suddenly just spread it out, like starting from Asian countries, like those Southeast Asian countries, like Vietnam, Thailand, and those countries. They were like thankfully like so respecting our culture and so welcoming our culture and like our music and those stuff. And with their like with those like foundation of fans, like robust foundations of big fans of Korea's like K culture, we were able to like expand more like explosively. So we started to have a lot of entertainment companies and entertainment services and other like cosmetics companies. So by now, I think we were able to like some sort of create like a competing like industry like how do I say like system and those stuff. So basically, those competitions created made them more stronger and more advanced, and gradually it like expanded Korea's entertainment and like those arts and those music industries so large that by now we have like strong like musicians and those people such as like BTS and like Blackpink and like those all those well-known celebrities which are representing Korea and like contributing in like innovating Korea's image from just one tiny Asian nation to a nation where like those culture, foods, and like those stuff are like combined and like gathered and creating a very wonderful harmony and those stuff. So yeah, entertainment services and like those music industry cosmetics have changed foreigners like perspective towards Korea. It has contributed a lot with like bringing innovation within Korea's like a tiny and like poor nation to a very like culture advanced like culture advanced nation and like community and those stuff. So yeah, I still very appreciate those entertainment services, like even in conditions where like no like government subsidization and those stuff were not allocated to them, the budgets were not supported, still they stick with that only specific like particular business and try to like expand their impact within Korean peninsula, and now it became a worldwide like company and like produce worldwide stars. So yeah, I very appreciate those founders of the entertainment services. Yeah, I would say like without entertainment services, Korea would not be this much recognized by people all around the world.
Thank you, Mason, for that very detailed and for that very insightful response and sharing your personal anecdotes as in Korean. So, to wrap up our podcast for today, we can conclude that South Korea's journey wasn't just a sprint to prosperity, it was a relay race across generations, passing the baton through war, dictatorship, crisis, and reinvention. It teaches us that economic miracles aren't just born in textbooks, they're built in classrooms, factories, parliament halls, and homes, and they require not just GDP growth but trust in institutions, discipline in policy, and belief in people. And since Dollar Dialogue is based out of Bangladesh, we can also say that Bangladesh, as an emerging markets everywhere, also stands at a crossroads. The global economy is volatile, and the climate is uncertain, and the future is digital. But in that uncertainty lies opportunity, which Korea has shown. For example, will we invest in the next generation? Will we build inclusive systems that reward effort over privilege, or will we digitize, democratize, and decentralize economic power? And the Korean playbook says that it's all possible, but you don't copy a miracle, you design sort of your own. So with that being said, Mr. Mason Min Seop Kim, is there any final words that you would like to say about the Dollar Dialogue podcast and about your experience today before we depart for today?
Yes, I would like to share my thoughts. Like, I think this podcast is very like very insightful and informative, and I also like to very appreciate all of you three presenters like deep interest and like showing deep understanding within my like country and like specific topics. So basically, like they nobody knows this specific about Korea's like economic development. Like they usually just know that Korea is like like Korea had made a very like high advancement from like very poor condition to this much. they don't know what the process was, but you guys all showed a very like wonderful understanding of this. And I'm sure that by creating these contents in future and near futures and more, this will, I don't know, like those students residing in the right now the developing countries, I believe this will be a very like insightful and very inspirational opportunity to those. So again, like Arib, Supreeth, and Mr. Kalib, I would very thank for creating these like high quality contents.
Thank you. Mr. Supreet Nagala, is there any final words you would like to say as well?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mason. You were an amazing speaker. I really enjoyed learning your perspectives, your first-hand perspectives, and your thoughts. So, thank you so much for agreeing and being with us on this podcast today.
It was also my pleasure. Very thank you. I would thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Supreet Nagala, Mr. Min Seop Mason Kim, and Mr. Shazib Kareen for the final concluding words. So that was all for Dollar Dialogue episode 49 today regarding Korean K-pop, regarding Korean economic miracle as one of the four Asian tigers. And thank you for today. And this is where we decode the world's economies at a time. And if this episode gave you an insight, please share it, start a conversation, ask the hard questions. Until next time, Dollar Dialogue, changing economics, one dialogue at a time. Stay curious, stay critical. That is all for today, and goodbye.